welcome for all of you who are watching. You're tuned into TMH as we present you our daily English news. Our headlines for today include Ethiopian federal government delegation has headed to the Tigray region. In Ethiopia's Tigray region, a horrific military cooperation is said to have been unleashed and a weaponized rape is in progress, as well as Ethiopian external debt services obligation pile forex reserve has hit rock bottom. As we move on to our main updates for today, the Ethiopian federal government delegation heads into Tigray. A delegation from the Ethiopian federal government has arrived in the capital of Tigray region, and the Ethiopian government communication services on Monday said the purpose of the delegation's visit is to oversee the implementation of last month's peace agreement. This is the first time any high-level federal delegation has traveled into Tigray in 2 years. As the government said, Tagesach Afo, who is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, is leading this delegation. He says this gesture is an attestation to the peace agreement getting on the right track and progressing, as the statement also alluded that the implementation of agreement, however, has been slow, and Tigray authorities have been blaming the federal government for not delivering on its end of the agreement. During the discussions with the delegation, the Tigray region president, Dr. Debretsion ገብረሚካኤል, highlighted the plight of the people of Tigray and called for the expeditious provision of humanitarian supplies and functioning of basic services throughout the entire Tigray region. He also pressed for the speedy resumption of all telecom, banking, and power services, as he urged for the implementation of all provisions of the Pretoria Agreement and assured the delegation of his government's dedication to that effect. Tigray religious leaders also appealed to the Ethiopian government to address as a matter of urgency multifaceted problems of the people of Tigray they are currently still facing. The federal government and the Tigrayan forces signed an agreement to permanently cease hostilities on the 2nd of November after 2 years of fighting that killed hundreds and thousands and displaced many others as well. In Ethiopia's Tigray, a horrific military cooperation is said to have been unleashed and a weaponized rape. They raped me in front of my father, and I was too scared to even make a sound, says a 13-year-old. They killed to threaten a 24-year-old Tigrayan woman who now lives in Kadarif refugee camp in Sudan. They came into our house, started looting. They did not stop there. They raped me. My brother tried to fight them in defense of me, but could not rescue and did not done with the rape as they pulled him out and shot him dead. Between February and April 2021, when the state was in control of the Tigray region, over 1,200 cases of sexual violence were registered in the regional health facilities, according to Amnesty International. Many of these survivors, however, told Amnesty that they had not visited any health facilities, suggesting these figures represent only a small fraction of the rapes in the context of the entire conflict within the 2 years. In this investigation, CCIJ also interviewed Dr. Fasika Amdeselase, who is the head of the Tigray Health Bureau, and during the early months of the war, he says his office received 1,772 sexual violence cases between the 3rd of November 2020, which is the beginning of the war, and until the 10th of June in 2021. The uptick of sexual violence survivors coming to the hospitals for care was the first indication that the soldiers who were running the town were raping women on a massive scale. Since then, however, evidence has only mounted in reports by the media, human rights groups, and the UN Commission, who were formed in December of 2021. A 50-something-year-old mother who was gang raped along with her daughters in February of 2021 by men she believes to be Amhara militiamen said that their lives are completely ruined. Ethiopia is reluctant on admitting and limiting prosecution might also almost look like justice if compared to another state actor in the conflict, such as Eritrea. By many accounts, Eritrean soldiers led the charge in weaponizing rape in the conflict in Tigray, and of the 13 survivors that were interviewed by CCIJ in this investigation, 5 of them said that their rapers were Eritrean soldiers, compared to 2 who pointed the Ethiopian soldiers out. Yet the former are accountable to neither the Ethiopian government nor the international community, from which their country often called the North Korea of Africa. The 24-year-old rape survivor says that her attackers wore the uniforms of Eritrean army. She said they did not hide their identity in the first place. They presented themselves as Eritreans. Another person who fled Humera in those months as a 17-year-old girl who was raped by 9 soldiers said, "I clearly remember there were 5 Eritrean soldiers." The identity of other 4 were unclear to her. She was not fully conscious during the part of the ordeal, but she says, like a bad dream, I can only remember that there were 4 and they spoke Amharic very fluently. She says the attack happened in early February 2021 after the soldiers ordered her to walk to their camp. I was scared they would shoot me, so I obeyed. When they reached the camp, they ripped my clothes off, took turns gang raping me, she says. As some of the victims say, while they are gang raped, the soldiers would say to them that they're cleansing their Tigrayan blood. Multiple reports have emerged since the Eritrean troops subjugating women and girls to sexual violence, but one incident in particular highlights the brutality of their alleged crimes. This happened in March of 2021, which is a video of a young Tigrayan mother who had reportedly been raped by 23 Eritrean soldiers circulated widely on social media, and it showed doctors removing long nails, pieces of plastic, and stones from her body. Ethiopian External Debt Services obligation pile forex reserve has hit bottom, as the reporter wrote on Ethiopia's external debt measure on a mass of the country's foreign exchange reserves dwindling and jeopardizing the ability to repay all of its loans on the timely basis. In the following few quarters, prior to June 2023, it is anticipated that Ethiopia will be liable for servicing a total of $1.6 billion in interest of loans. According to sources, debt payments requests from creditors to the Ethiopian government were $320 million from December 2022 alone. According to the latest Ministry of Finance debt analysis that have been reported earlier this month, external debt service is expected to rise steadily over the next 2 years. Assuming that the committed and undisbursed amounts are dispersed over the coming years, Ethiopia's total estimated external debt is to be serviced will increase from $2.3 billion in 2022 to 23 to about $4.1 billion in 2024 to 25, becoming the country's highest debt obligation in a single year. Approximately $6.2 billion in central government domestic debt principal payments are due within the year of 2022 to 2023 and the 2023 to 2024 year, including treasury bills but excluding direct advances. It is a situation that has worried policymakers who are striving to achieve the debt restricting and request that was made to the G20 countries in the year of 2020, which is being delayed owing to the turmoil in the Ethiopian country and the reluctance of China to finish Ethiopia's debt restructuring as well. Ethiopia's FX reserves have fallen to about $1.5, which is enough to just cover less than a month's import bills, but insufficient to satisfy any of the debt commitments. As we move on to our final update for today, former U.S. Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa says that the Ethiopian government will have to earn the support of its international partners through good faith implementation of the Pretoria Agreement. Jeffrey Feltman, who's also visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution, a senior fellow at the United Nations Foundation, made the remark in an article published on Foreign Affairs under the title, Ethiopia's Hard Road to Peace. Feltman noted that the Pretoria Agreement, signed between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray leadership, has its flaws, including an overly ambitious initial timetable for TPLF disarmament, inadequate monitoring and reporting processes, a lack of clarity on the accountability, and mostly, seriously, the silence of the Eritrean regime involvement, except for a vague prohibition on the collusion with any external forces hostile to either party. He added, however, that there are still things that Ethiopia's international partners can do to support the peace deal and give it its best chance of succeeding. They can seek to create as much momentum for the agreement as possible, coming together to provide unified support for its implementation, also using their limited leverage to dissuade Eritrea and other potential spoilers from prolonging the conflict any further. By accelerating life-saving humanitarian aid, pushing for a credible monitoring and verification mechanism, and encouraging and warring parties to supplement the ceasefire as well as the implementation talks with political process, as Feltman said, foreign powers can reinforce what is so far an encouraging but fragile Ethiopian bid for peace. At the end of the day, however, the Ethiopian government will have to earn the support of its international partners through good faith in implementation of the agreement, says the special envoy, and stated that he detailed benchmarks as the international community should monitor include the withdrawal of Eritrean troops from Ethiopia and of all local Amhara forces from Tigray as well. The initiation of credible transitional justice, as well as accountability mechanisms, and the establishment of the political process that builds on the projects, the ceasefire arrangement from the spoilers, and the addresses tensions and the violence in other parts of Ethiopia. Only once Ethiopian international partners are satisfied, Addis Ababa is making steady progress in these areas and should also restore all of the economic and development assistance that they suspended in the earlier stages of this conflict. Feltman also called on the international community to use one or other more effective leverage at its disposal in the restoration of universal UN Security Council sanctions. According to Feltman, even before Russia's invasion of Ukraine began to dominate the agendas of leaders in North America as well as Europe, the international focus on Ethiopia was insufficient and insufficiently coordinated to change the basic trajectory of the conflict. Ethiopia's neighbors and partners consulted frequently with one another, agreeing on the imperative of Ethiopian stability, but they diverged on how best to help, as the United States and the European Union hoped that, combined with emergency humanitarian assistance, punitive measures such as threat of sanctions and the withholding of development aid would in fact halt the atrocities and move the parties from a battlefield to the negotiating table. But China, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates doubled down on backing Abiy, providing his government with military support, including sophisticated drones, with the exception of Eritrea, which is deeply implicated in the war, as the African countries mostly watched and worried. The three rotating African members of the UN Security Council, at the behest of Ethiopia, largely succeeding in keeping the war in Tigray out of council, debates that despite the threat it posed to international peace and security, as the African Union itself, headquartered in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, remained mostly mum, presumably to avoid annoying its host. Abiy has assured me and others that he can manage the Eritrean government to the point of expelling the military from Tigray if necessary. As the former special envoy disclosed, he, however, added that the Ethiopian prime minister's confidence seems unmoored from reality. If Afwerki withdraws Eritrean troops from Tigray, he would retain other methods of interfering within the Ethiopian conflict. Among Ethiopian proxies, Asmara has cultivated and hardline Amhara militants who share Afwerki's hatred for the Tigrayans and who might have been persuaded to flaunt their obligation under the Nairobi Declaration to withdraw from parts of Tigray that they currently still claim and control. Moreover, Afwerki aims to do more than simply eliminate the TPLF threat to Eritrea. Based on Afwerki's history of attempting to destabilize his neighbors, one can conclude that he also wants to prevent the emergence of the stable Ethiopia that dominates the political and the security environment of the Horn of Africa in whole, as it did under Prime Minister Meles Zenawi. On that note, that concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.